Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Ask the Expert webinar, Report Design in Action, Applying Report Design Best Practices. My name is Tiago de Souza, and I will serve as your moderator for today's event. Now, I would like to take a moment to introduce our presenter, Nicole Ball, a Principal Technical Training Consultant here at SAS. Nicole teaches courses on SAS visual analytics, SAS data quality, and the SAS programming language. Nicole is also a course developer for SAS Visual Analytics, which includes writing and updating courses and preparing customized training. Before coming to SAS, Nicole was an economic analyst at the Federal Reserve, where she learned more about SAS code and how to apply it to real-world problems. She has a master's degree in economics from the University of Texas at Dallas and a bachelor's degree in economics from Trinity University in San Antonio, Texas. With all of that out of the way, why don't we turn things over to our presenter so we can get started. Nicole, please take it away.
Thanks, Tiago. Hi, everybody. If you were here a few months ago, I presented Ask the Expert about some of the report design best practices that you should keep in mind when building reports. Some people suggested that it might be good to actually see how to apply those. So that's what we're going to look at today. We're going to go over quickly the report design best practices we discussed earlier. So if you weren't here, you'll get to see a little snippet of that. And then I've created a report. I've dubbed it the ugly report that we're going to go in and apply these best practices to make the report beautiful. So let's go ahead and get started. So for our scenario, we have an existing report that is available to us. This could have been a report that we created before we knew about the report design best practices. It could have been a report somebody else on our team created, but we're going to take that report, we're going to identify some issues with the report, and then we're going to apply our best practices to that report to make a report that's truly beautiful. So as you recall, if you were there are 5 steps to building an impactful report. One is to draft a plan. So you have to have a plan in mind before you start to build your report. Then you're going to choose the best chart to display your data. You're going to focus on what's important. You'll consider the layout, and then you'll test, and test again. So we're going to go through each of these steps for the report that we have available to us. So for the draft a plan step, the first thing you want to do is select your data. This has already been done for us because we have the existing report. We need to know our audience, which is true from building a report from scratch to applying best practices to a report. That helps us determine what types of charts to display. If I have an audience that's full of statisticians, I can display some more advanced objects than if I have an audience that's the general public. I also want to make sure that I craft my story and I sketch my design. So let's go in and start looking at some of let me go and show you the report, actually. I'm going to share my screen. And I have my report open, and this I have dubbed the ugly report. I built this specifically to make sure that we're not following the report design best practices so we can see what not to do. It's actually kind of fun to build. So some of the things we noticed just right off the bat are the colors are atrocious. The tabs, the page tabs are not labeled appropriately. First, second, and third means nothing to me. But we're going to go in and rediscuss some of our best practices and take a look at how to make this report beautiful. And I did forget to mention this, but if you're not seeing the report, you need to look at the media player in your On24 dashboard. That's where the screen share will be visible. And I suggest you open that because I'm going to be going back and forth between the slides and sharing the report and applying those best practices. Okay, so our ugly report, we see what it looks like. We already have the data selected. We kind of have an idea of our audience. It's other people like us, report designers. They understand visual analytics. So we want to make sure that we create this report the best way possible to get our message across. So I'm going to go back to the slides. And the next step is to choose the best chart. And There are a couple of different things to remember when choosing the best chart. You want to think about what you're trying to show. If you're trying to highlight one important fact, you would choose specific types of charts. If you're trying to show survey or questionnaire results, there are other types of charts that are available for that. If you did not attend the previous Ask the Expert, I have a whole series of blogs about each of these steps, which we can provide in the Q&A. So you can go back and review what charts are recommended for each of these things. So let's go back to our report. And remember, this is shown in the media player. So we're going to go through each of these pages and choose the best chart for our data. So I'm going to start on the first page. Notice that this tree map, first of all, can't read any of the values, but it's showing customer satisfaction and product profit by date. If I want to compare two or more things over time, I would choose either a line chart or a time series plot, not a tree map. So I'm going to right click the tree map and I'm going to change it to, and notice the time series plot is recommended. So I'm going to start with that. Now, because my two data items, customer satisfaction and product profit, have very different ranges, a dual axis time series plot would make more sense. So right now it's displaying them on two separate graphs, but it might be a better idea to display them on multiple axes so I can see them in one graph. Now, you'll also notice that customer satisfaction has very high values. That's because if you recall, by default, Visual Analytics sums all of our measures. That's the default aggregation. Sum doesn't make a lot of sense for customer satisfaction, so we're also going to change that to an average. That makes more sense for us. Before we do that, let's change this to a dual axis time series plot. I can right click, change the time series plot to a dual axis time series plot. Now, it's important to note that the recommended object is just a guideline. It might not be the best choice for your data. So it's a good thing to start out with when you first begin looking at your data, but you can always make changes as necessary. The other thing about this graph is it's showing daily data, which is very variable. We can see there's lots of ups and downs. So what we're going to do is, instead of looking at values by day, I'd like to look at values by week. And then I'm also going to change that customer satisfaction to show an average. So to make these data changes, I'm going to go to the data pane on the left, and then I'm going to start with transaction date. If I right click, I can select format, more formats, and then I'm going to choose the week format. So you'll notice all of these formats are for dates. And then for some formats, you have options on what to display. So I can either display the week number or a W plus the week number. So that's one I'll choose. I'll click OK, and you'll see that my dual axis time series plot updates to show by week instead of by day. I'm also going to change customer satisfaction from the default aggregation of sum to average. So I can right click customer satisfaction, select aggregation and average. And then again, we'll see that my chart automatically updates to display those changes. The last thing I want to do for this particular chart is modify some options. So in the right pane, I'll click the options button. And the first thing I always like to do is give it a meaningful name. I'm very particular about that, and I do this for all of my charts. So I'm going to call this customer satisfaction and product profit over time. And forgive my typing, I'm not the best typist in the world. For the title, I'm going to do no title. It's up to you based on your audience and what you're trying to display, if you should display a title or not. And then the other thing I like to do is clean it up a bit. I'm a big fan of removing all chart junk. And one of the things I'd like to remove is this transaction date at the bottom. I think most people can realize that those are date values, specifically weekly values, so I don't need to see that in my chart. So in the X-axis options group, notice there are options for both time series that I can modify. and both or all axes. In the x-axis options group, I'm going to clear axis label, and that removes the transaction date. So far that chart looks pretty good. I'm pleased with that. Now let's look at the geomap. The geomap is showing customer locations, and although you can't tell, each of those points represents many, many customers. There's too many customers to actually see a lot of details. So I think a better fit for this would be to show a geo-cluster map. It's useful for displaying a larger number of distinct locations. In that case, markers that are close to each other will be grouped into a single marker to make the map a little bit easier to read. The nice thing about the geo-cluster map is that the clusters change as you zoom in and out of the map, so it's very dynamic. So I'm going to right-click the coordinate map and change the geo-coordinate to, and notice there's no recommended object here. That's fine. I'll choose geo-cluster. And you can see now, instead of displaying individual markers for each customer, I get clusters of customers. So this gives me a better idea of where most of my customers are located. I'm going to change some options to make this a little bit nicer looking. First, I'm going to give it a name. I'll call it customer locations. I'm also going to give it a custom title, and I'm going to do the same name, customer locations. So like I said, it depends on your audience and your report, which objects you'd like to give titles and which you don't need titles for. There's also specific options in the cluster group for geo clusters. I can specify the maximum number of clusters to display. To me, 25 is too much. It's a little bit messy still. So I'm going to modify this to 5. And then I'm also going to change the cluster spacing to medium. So my goal is to try to get it to where the clusters don't overlap. I don't like to see the overlapping, so that's why I changed those two options. Now, you'll notice as I zoom in, let's say I'm going to zoom into Europe, my clusters are going to update to reflect my zoom. And then I can always get back to the main level on the geomap by clicking the snowman in the upper right corner and then choosing to zoom, reset zoom. And that gets me back to where I was before. Okay, there's one last chart to look at on this page, and it's a list table. It's showing unit production, unit discards, unit target, and unit yield rate by unit. And that looks pretty good. The colors are hideous, I will give you that. I do like purple, but that's too purpley. But we'll modify colors later. Right now, we're just looking at the chart type. So list table is a good choice for displaying multiple measures for a large number of categories, and that's what we're seeing. So let's go to the second tab. On the second tab, I have key value objects that are displaying unit yield rate, discards, production, and target. Key value objects are great for highlighting one important fact, which is what I'm doing. Again, the colors aren't great, but we'll deal with that later. Let's look at the bar chart. The bar chart is showing the number of products by unit ID and product line. There are too many bars. In fact, there are so many bars that I have to have an overview axis at the bottom just to look at all of the values. If you recall from our earlier presentation, overview axes are not great for screen readers, especially users that use them to navigate the report. So our goal is to try to get rid of the overview axes in our report. I want to make this chart easier to look at for everybody, so I'm going to use a hierarchy instead. So you'll notice that each of the bars is colored by product line. So that could be the top level of our hierarchy. And then the next level would be the unit ID, which is what each individual bar represents. So I can double click a product line and drill down to view all the units that produce that product line. Now, if I go to my data pane, I already have a hierarchy created that starts with product line as the top level and then goes to unit ID for the second level. So I'm going to use that in my bar chart instead. In the right pane, on the roles tab, I'm going to remove the group role, which is product line, and then I'm going to click unit ID and replace it with my hierarchy, my product unit hierarchy. I'm also going to add to the group role product brand. which is a level up from product line. So now each of the bars are colored by product brand. Now the overview axis is still there. And in fact, I don't even like the horizontal layout of the bars. I think it might look better if they're displayed vertically, horizontally instead of vertically. They're displayed vertically now. I'd rather see them horizontally. I think that might look better. So on the options pane, I'm going to make some changes. I'm going to first change the name because I like to do that. I'm going to call this number of products. For the title, sorry, I'm going to choose custom title, and I'll do number of products for products and units. One of the nice things about visual analytics is it will give you an automatic title that uses all of the data items. So if you don't want to think of a name, an automatic title is a good choice. Okay, some of the other things I like to do specifically for bar charts are in the graph frame group. I like to remove grid lines because I think that clutters the bar chart a little bit. I'm also going to change the direction to horizontal. And when I do that, it removes the overview axis. And I get a little note that tells me, hey, we removed that because that's not available for horizontal bar charts. And that's perfectly fine. That's actually what I wanted. The other thing I'm going to do, because I removed the grid lines, I'm going to add data labels. So it's easier to see the values for each of the bars. Now that I have the data labels, I don't really need this entire x-axis, right? The title tells me that it's number of products, so I don't need that. I don't need the numbers because the data labels tell me. So in the x-axis options group, I'm going to clear axis label. I'm going to clear tick values, which is those numbers, and then I'm going to clear the axis line. So that looks a lot cleaner than it did before. For the y-axis option, I'm also going to clear the axis label because I don't really need that either. And then I like to clear the axis line. That cleans things up a bit as well. So typically, this is exactly how I like my bar charts to look in general. If you recall from another Ask the Expert I did, you can always right-click and then save this to the objects pane as an object template with all of those changes applied. So I don't have to go through and do it every time I create a bar chart. The last thing I want to change for this bar chart is I'm going to change the legend. I'm going to place it in the middle on the right side. So that's a very clean looking bar chart. I can double click any one of the bars to drill down and view units that produce that particular product line. Okay, so that looks pretty good. So I'm happy, I think, with the objects on the second page. Let's go to the third page. The pie chart is showing the number of orders and product quality by product line. This is actually the worst chart that you can ever use. They're stacked pie charts. I strongly recommend that you never use them. They look kind of like a lollipop to me. It doesn't give me any insight into the values. Instead of the pie chart, here I'm going to use a dual axis chart, like a dual axis bar chart, to compare the two series, number of orders and product quality, with very different ranges for some category, in this case, product line. So I'm going to change this to a dual axis bar chart. I'll right-click the pie chart and change the pie chart to a dual axis bar chart. And then I can see the same issue here as we saw before for customer satisfaction for product quality. It ranges from 0 to 10% millions. Remember, that's because by default, Visual Analytics uses the sum to aggregate measures. I want to use average for product quality. So I can make that change on the data pane. I'll find product quality, right-click, and change the aggregation to average. Now, the title is showing pie chart. This is no longer a pie chart. So I can right-click the dual axis bar chart and hide the object title. That's one way to do it. I can also do it in the options pane. And then I'm also going to sort by product line. Right now it's displaying the values in descending order by the first measure, number of orders. I wanted to display the values in alphabetical order for product line. So I can right-click the chart and choose to sort by product line ascending, and then the bars will be reordered. Okay, so this looks pretty good. Now let's look at the tree map. First of all, the tree map is called word cloud, which is super confusing. The other thing is it's displaying two measures for a lot of product styles. I think a list table might be a better choice for this because there's many product styles, and if I want to view details, it might be easier to see in a list table. So I'm going to right-click the tree map and change it to a list table. Notice it recommends a bar chart, but I'm saying, you know, I think list table would be better. So I'm choosing a list table instead. Then in the right pane, in the Options tab, I'm going to select No Title. And I'm also going to add totals at the end. So this will total my number of orders, so it adds up all of those values. And then for product quality, it's doing an average because the aggregation is average. So it's averaging product quality for all my product styles. So the totals will use whatever aggregation you specify for the data item on the data pane. Now the word cloud, I also want to change. In general, I don't like word clouds. I think they're cool to look at, but they don't really give you a lot of useful information. The first thing that's wrong with this, besides that it's a word cloud, is that it's labeled tree map, which is super confusing. But what we're looking at is we're looking at number of orders and product quality by product make. So if you think about the hierarchy for our products, we have product brand, which is the top level, product line, which we're showing in the dual axis bar chart, product make, which is currently displayed in the word cloud, and then product style, which is displayed in our list table. So what I'd like to do is change the tree map to change the word cloud to a tree map. I think that might better be used to display our various product makes. So I'm going to right click the word cloud and change it to a tree map. At least now the values match. And I can see all my various product makes, and notice that the tiles are colored by one measure, product quality, and then they're sized by my second measure, number of orders. So tree maps are really good for showing that information, comparing two measures, and they're especially useful to describe how parts relate to the whole. Okay, I'm also going to right click and hide the object title on this one as well. And a little bit later, we're going to rearrange these objects and set up actions so that we can see that hierarchy in practice. Okay, so that's choosing the best chart. Next, we're going to look at, let me go back to my slides. The next thing we'll look at is some best practices with regards to chart building. There are some things to keep in mind. Besides choosing the best chart for your data, you want to make sure that you use the simplest graph possible, which we've tried to do as we've modified our graph objects. We want to use only the most important data, keep our graphs simple, use a zero baseline if necessary, and use two-dimensional charts. And then here's where we come into the fact that we want to choose our colors wisely. So we're going to go in and modify some of the colors that we've used in other charts to make them look a little bit better. So I'm going to go back to my report, which is slowly starting to look a little bit better. And we are going to start on the first tab. So as we talked about before, the list table overuses colors. Less is more. In addition, we can see that there's a cell graph displayed for unit discards, which is really not necessary. So we're going to modify the colors and remove that cell visualization. So I'll start by clicking the list table, and then in the right pane on the Options tab, I'm going to give this a meaningful name. I'll call it Unit Details. I'm going to select to show no title for this particular table. And then in the Style group, notice that background is selected, and then we've chosen a purple background. By default, background is not selected, so there is no background color, and that's typically what I like to use. Okay, you can also make sure that it's selected and click a better color than the bright purple. All right, let's scroll down, and in the table group, notice that headings is also selected. That's this portion up here, and a purple color is displayed. I'm actually going to leave headings selected, but I'm going to choose a better color. I'm going to choose the automatic color. So that's white, and that looks pretty good. I'm also going to look in the cells group. These are the individual cell values, and we have both a background color and an alternating background color displayed. For background color, I'll select the automatic color, which is also white. And then for the alternating background color, I'm going to select a pale blue. So it's still easy for me to distinguish between the different rows of the list table, but it's not so vibrant and atrocious as it was before. I also want to delete the cell visualization. So in the cell visualizations group, I'm going to delete unit discards. And then also in the totals field for the background color, I'm going to choose automatic here as well. So in general, I would say the best thing to do is think about using the automatic values, leaving them as the default, because that will give you the cleanest report. You can always go and clean things up as you like. All right, some other things to notice about the list table. The production, discards, and target values do not contain commas, so they're a little bit difficult to read. So I can modify formats for that. And then if you look at unit yield rate, we have the same issue we had with customer satisfaction and product quality. It's using the default aggregation of sum. It might make sense to use average instead. So on the data pane, I'm going to start by selecting unit discards, unit production, and unit target, and I'll right-click these objects and select Format, More Formats. I'll choose comma with a width of 12 and 0 decimals, and I can see a little sample at the bottom. So I'll click OK. Notice my list table updates to add those commas. It's a little bit easier to read. I'll clear the selection on the data pane, and I'm going to find unit yield rate, right-click, and change the format. Nope, change the aggregation to average. And so now I see average values, and the average is displayed for my totals. So that looks good. My list table looks a lot better. On the second tab, I see my key value objects. They use very different colors. They're all over the place. I want to make them look more consistent. So I'm going to start with unit yield rate and go to the options tab. I'll give this the name of yield rate. And then in the key value group for the style, I always like to choose text. People often like the infographic look, but I think text makes more of a statement because it's really focusing on what's important in your report, which is the data. I also like to choose the center for the alignment, so everything's aligned in the center. The position I like to choose in the center as well. And then for all of the colors, I like to use the default. So this yellow for measure value is not the default. I'll choose automatic. So unit yield rate looks pretty good. Let's do the same thing for unit discards. So I want everything to be consistent. Now, it's important to note that if I had not modified options when I first built this report, all my key value objects would look consistent. But again, we're assuming that someone else had built this report for us. So we're just fixing it up. So for the name, I'm going to put discards. I want to do the same types of things. Notice that this key value object has padding added. I'm going to clear that and just use the default padding, which is recommended typically. I'm also going to make those same changes we did before. So style is already text. I'll do alignment center, position center, and then I want to change the measure label and the measure value to their default colors. So I'll just use their automatic colors, and now they'll all match. Notice that the fonts are a little bit different. We'll talk more about the fonts a little bit later. Let's do the same thing for production. I'm going to start by giving it a name of production. Then I'm going to make the same types of changes. This one has a padding assigned of 0. I'm going to use the default. I think it's like 12 or 16. So that looks good. I'll also verify that the style is text, the alignment is center, the position is center, and then I'm going to verify that the measure label and measure value are automatic, and they both are. The other thing I want to change is notice the unit discards is abbreviated. I want to do the same thing for all my other key value objects as well. So I'll select abbreviate numeric values, and then I don't need to see this aggregation listed here. So I'll clear aggregation. So now they're all looking more consistent. Finally, let's do the same thing for unit target. I'll start by giving it a name of target. For the style, I'll choose text. I want to make sure the alignment is center, the position is center, and then I need to change the measure value color to automatic. So already you can start to tell that this report is looking a lot cleaner than it did before. Okay, I did talk about fonts a little bit. Let's talk about how fonts work for your report. The first place you can set the font for your report is at the report level. So on the options pane, if I choose the report, which is called 180.001 Ugly Report, there's options here for designing the report as a whole. So if I select to change the font at the report level, it will change the fonts for the entire report. I can then override fonts for specific objects if I would like. It is not recommended to do that. So I recommend that you have one font for the entire report and leave it at the default, set it at the report level and leave it alone. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna make sure that the fonts for the entire report is Avenir Next. The issue is that some of our objects have chosen to override the default, so we'll have to go in and change them. So let me go to the first tab. The list table is not using that particular font. So on the options field, if I go to the table group, notice the headings are using Avenir Next. So that's good. I'm going to change the size to 12 so it stands out a little bit more. Then in the cells group, we're not using that default font. So I'm going to change this to Avenir Next. And then I want to do a size of 12 here as well. And then finally, we have our totals, which I also need to change to the default, and then a size of 12. So now it's all consistent and it looks a lot better. On the second page, I'm going to do the same thing for my key value objects. Unit yield rate looks like it is using Avenir Next, so that's good. Let's look at unit discards. It's using a different font, so I'll change it to the default. Unit production is using a different font. I'll change that to the default as well. And unit target is using yet another font, and I'll change that to the default. So by making the fonts the same for all of my objects in my report, it makes the report look more consistent, and it doesn't make anything stand out unnecessarily from others. Okay, so this looks pretty good. Let's go on to the next step. For the next step in creating a beautiful report, we want to focus on what's important. In this step, we want to make sure that our reports are organized, easy to navigate, versatile, and attractive. And we're going to do this by grouping all of the objects into pages. So all the objects that talk about units, we'll put it on its own page. All the objects that talk about products, we'll put that on its own page. And this is kind of where you try to implement your data story. So remember at the very beginning, we set up a data story, a story that we want to tell with our report. We can tell this story by organizing our report into multiple pages. We also want to make sure things are displayed in the correct fashion. Okay, so let me get back to the report. And let's start to focus on what's important. So I'm going to start with the pages. The pages have not great names right now, so I'm going to give them more descriptive names. The first page, I'll right-click and rename to Overview. The second page, if I double-click the Page tab, I can rename it that way. I'm going to call this Product Analysis. And then the third page, I'm going to call unit analysis. So right now, the objects are not on the appropriate page. We're going to move them around so that they're on the page that they should be on. So let's start on the Overview tab. The list table is showing details about units. So I'm going to right-click and move this to the Unit Analysis page, right? Because that's where we talk about units. On the Product Analysis tab, I'm going to move the bar chart to Overview because it's talking about both products and units. I think it might make more sense on the Overview page. So I'll right-click and move this to the Overview page. And then all of my key value objects, they're talking about units. So I want to move them to Unit Analysis. So I can do the same thing. I can right-click them and move them to Unit Analysis, or I can use the outline pane. So in the left pane, the outline pane shows all of the pages and all of the objects on each of those pages. Here, I can click and drag objects to move them. So I'm going to click yield rate and drag it to Unit Analysis. I try to put it in the wrong area. Let me get rid of that. Okay, so I want to move it to the Unit Analysis page. I'm going to do the same for production, discards, and target. So it might be a little bit easier to move objects using the outline pane. Also on the outline pane, if I look at the Unit Analysis page, I want to move the dual axis bar chart, the list table, and the tree map, all which talk about products, to the Product Analysis page. So I can click and drag each one individually like I did before, or I can click one, hold down the control key, and click the other two, and then drag them as a group to the Unit Analysis page. And for some reason, my tree map is not selecting. Okay, there we go. And I'm going to drag them as a group to the Product Analysis page. Now, it does tell me some actions were removed because they weren't supported, but we'll deal with actions later. So I'm not overly concerned with that right now. So what we should have is on the Overview page, I have 3 control objects that are page prompts. We'll talk about those later. I have customer satisfaction and product profit over time. That's my dual axis time series plot. I have my geo cluster map and then my bar chart. On the Product Analysis page, I have 3 control objects that are on the page itself, not in the page prompt area. A dual axis bar chart, a tree map, and a list table. On the Unit Analysis page, I have 3 control objects in the page prompt area. I have an image, my 4 key value objects, and then my list table of unit details. Now the image I don't really need, so I'm going to right-click this from the outline pane and delete it. So not only can you move things around on the outline pane, but you can also modify the objects from here as well. You can delete them, you can change their names, things like that. Okay, so this looks pretty good. Now, as we were going through the overview, we've probably noticed that each page has some control objects. One to select country, one to select continent, and one to select city. And they're on every single page. It might be better to put these as report prompts, so I select them only once and it filters the entire report. So I'm going to expand the report control area at the top of the report, and I'm going to drag each of these control objects to the report prompt area. I'll start with the country button bar, and later we'll talk about if these are appropriate controls or not. Then I'll drag the continent drop-down list control, and then the city text input. Okay, because I have them in the report control area, I don't need those controls on the Product Analysis page, so I can delete each of them from there. I could also delete these from the outline pane. On the Unit Analysis page, I don't need the controls here either, so I can delete them. So this makes it easier for my report viewer because they can select the values once and then have it applied to the entire report instead of having to select them multiple times. Okay, now that we have the pages kind of set up in the way we want, we can add actions between objects to do cascading filters. The first place I want to add these cascading filters is on the report prompt area. So when I select a continent, I want to make sure that only countries in that continent are displayed. When I select a country, I want to make sure only cities in that country are displayed. So I'm going to start at the top level, which is continent, the most general information. And in the right pane, I'll click the actions button. When I select a continent, I want it to filter country. So I'll select the button bar. Notice that the action is filtering. And then I'll select the country button bar. And when I select a country, I want it to filter the text input control for facility city. So I'll verify that filter is selected here as well. I can also add actions between objects. The one that we talked about specifically was on the product analysis page. Recall that we said the product line was the most general level of the hierarchy. Then we had product makes and then product styles. So if I select a product line, I want to see only the makes in that line and so on and so forth. So I'm going to start with the bar chart, and on the actions pane, when I select a product line, I want it to filter the tree map. And then for the tree map, when I select a product make, I want it to filter the list table. Okay, so my actions are now set up. So when I select these things, I only get returned values within that particular selection. Now, let's look at the next step. Let's see, I think we're still on the same step. So now that we've improved the organization and versatility, we want to enhance our navigation and the attractiveness of the report. So to do this, I'm going to start with my report prompts. Whenever I have prompts in my report, I always think it's a good idea to add instructions on how to use them. So let's start with our button bar. And in the right pane on the options tab, I'm going to give this a name of country selector. And I do that for all of my control objects. I give it the name of the data item and then the word selector, so I can easily identify them in my outline pane. I also like to give my controls a custom title that provides some instructions. So I'll say select a country. And depending on your audience, this can be more detailed. So you can say select a country to filter the report or something like that. I'll do the same thing for the drop-down list control. I'm going to call this continent selector. I'll give it a custom title that is instructions, and I'll say select a continent. And then for my text input control, I'll call this city selector. And then I'll give it a custom title that says enter a city. Now, also what I'd like to do to enhance the attractiveness of my report is on the unit analysis tab, I'm going to add a display rule to my unit yield rate. When it's low, when I'm classifying low as less than 50%, I want to display this in another color. So I'll select that key value object, and in the right pane on the display rules tab, I'm going to add a new rule for unit yield rate. I'm going to give it a label. This is a best practice called low yield rates. Screen readers will read this label when they view the object or when a viewer views the object. The operator is going to be less than, and then the value is going to be 50%. And the style, I'm going to choose a light red color and click OK. I think I'll do a little bit darker red. So when my yield rate falls below 50%, the value will be displayed as red. Okay, and that just tells me, hey, this is something I need to pay attention to. While we're here, let's also talk about our control objects. They are not using the best control for the data. If you recall, button bars are great for up to 5 values. Drop-down list controls are great for 6 to 40 values, and text inputs are great for distinct values over 40. So I'm going to change these things up a bit. So let's start with my country selector. If I go in the right pane to the Roles tab and hover over facility country, I can see the number of distinct values there are. So facility country has 32 distinct values. This would be better displayed in a drop-down list control. So I can right-click the country selector, change the button bar to a drop-down list, which is recommended. So that's perfect. For the continent selector, if I look at the distinct values for facility continent, there are 6. So I think maybe a button bar would better display these values. So I'll right-click the continent selector and change the drop-down list to a button bar. For the city selector, there are 125 distinct values for facility city. So a text input control is the best way to display that. So I'm going to leave that one as is. Okay, so you can already start to tell that our report is looking a little bit better. Now let's go to the next step of our report design best practices. And in the next step, we're going to consider the layout. So we want to limit the number of pages and the number of objects on each page, but we also want to make more important objects larger, consider the placement of objects, arrange objects with actions in a logical order. Right now, they are not arranged in that fashion. We want to make sure we use negative space to showcase our values, and then we can use either the default grid layout or containers. So let me share my screen again, and let's start considering the layout for our report. Okay, so we're going to start by organizing the pages a little bit. Typically, what I like to do when I build a report is I like to have a page that describes the report. I generally call it like table of contents or something like that. So I'm going to add a new page to this report. And I actually have created a template for my table of content pages. So it's possible in Visual Analytics to build a layout for a page and then save it as a page template so you can use it in other reports as well. And I always do this for my table of contents pages, so they are always consistent looking. They have a consistent look and feel across all of my reports. So you can see I've created a page template called Table of Contents. The other ones are default and they come with Sass, and you can use those as well. I think I did an Ask the Expert about page templates too. So I'm going to add that to my report. It's given the name of the template, Table of Contents, and then it's added a logo, some information about the pages, about the report, and an image. Now I want this Table of Contents page to be displayed first, so I can drag it to the left so it's displayed before all my other page tabs. Now, in the report prompt area, if you recall, we select a continent, it filters the countries. We select a country, it filters the city. I should really display these in a logical order. So I'm going to move the button bar for continent to the left side. So now my actions, my objects are displayed in the order that my actions are applied. I'm going to do the same thing for the product analysis tab. Recall that the bar chart filters the tree map, which filters the list table. I'm going to just rearrange this so the tree map is on the right side of the bar chart. Oops, and I can use the handlebars to do that. So my bar chart filters the tree map, which filters the list table. So that's a logical order. I also want to add some instructions about the actions that are available on this page. So I can do this using a text object. In the left pane on the Objects tab, under the Content group, I'll drag a text object above the bar chart. And then I'm going to give it some quick instructions. So I can say something like double click a bar in the bar chart to filter the tree map. And that looks good. I'll click OK. In the right pane on the Options tab, I can call this bar chart instructions. And then I'm going to duplicate this and use it for the tree map as well. So I'll duplicate it and move it above the tree map. In this one, I want to say double click a tile in the tree map to filter the list table. And then I want to give this a name of tree map instructions. It's important that you always provide instructions to your viewers so they know what actions are available. You don't want to have them just clicking around willy-nilly and waiting for something to happen. So it's a very good idea to give them instructions about what to do. I'm also going to make the list table a little bit smaller, so I can focus more on the bar chart and the tree map. On the unit analysis page, notice that we have 4 key value objects, and those same 4 values are displayed in the list table. So I want to make sure the order of the key value objects matches the order of the measures in the list table. So I have unit production, unit discards, unit target, and unit yield rate. I actually did that pretty good. I wasn't expecting that. I'm also going to resize the list table so it's a bit bigger. Typically, I like my key value objects to display 25% of the screen. And if you notice, there's grid lines in the background that show me that value. So by default, the default grid layout is a 4x8 layout. So I like the key value objects to take up one of those 4 buckets. So that looks pretty good to me. We can also rename the data items if we need to make sure they all are shown as the same size in the key value objects, but they look pretty good to me. The last thing I want to do is add some links and things to the table of contents page. So you'll notice in the pages block that it has a list of all of the page tabs. I want to add a link to each of those tabs so I can easily get there from this page. So I'm going to double click the pages text object. I'm going to make the pages tab. Notice it's heading 2. That's important for screen readers as well. It will put more emphasis on those items. And then the rest of my values are paragraphs, which is what I want it to be. For the overview value, I'm going to highlight it, select links, and add a page link to the overview page and click OK. I'll do the same for product analysis, add a page link to the product analysis page. And then for unit analysis, I'm going to add a page link to the unit analysis page. The last thing I want to do is where it says this report uses data from Insight Toy Company, which was last updated, I'm going to select before the period and add the table modified time. So what that is it's interactive text that will display the date and time that the table was last updated. And this updates every time the data is updated. So that's a nice way for people to know how often the report was updated. Finally, on the overview page, the only thing I want to do is make sure that the geomap is the focus. So I'm going to move it so it fills the entire left side of the page. So it's the focus of the page, and that looks much better. Now, we are running a little bit out of time, so I'm going to stop there. But I do want to remind you that the last step of the process is to test your report in multiple ways. We can view the report on multiple devices. We can do things like play the report for like a kiosk or slideshow. You just want to make sure that the report looks good in every way that you want to display it. And I think we'll stop there for now because we're running a little bit out of time.
All right, now on to our first question here. Nicole, what if I don't know which type of chart to use for my data? Can SAS Visual Analytics help?
Yeah, so if you recall, the first thing I did was I changed that tree map, and Visual Analytics recommended an object to use. So by default, based on the data items you assign to the object, Visual Analytics will make a recommendation on the chart type to use. If you don't know and you're building a chart from scratch, you can take the data items you want to visualize and drag them to a page, and Visual Analytics will select the best chart type. So I always recommend that. That's a great place to start. And then you can modify it as necessary, just like we did in the presentation.
Gotcha. Thank you. Someone's asking here, how can I apply my corporate colors to a report?
That's a good question. So I'm going to share my screen for this one because I think it's easier for me to show you than to enunciate it. But if you recall, at one portion, I looked at the options at the report level, and some of the options were things like setting the theme. So there are different themes that are available from Visual Analytics and SAS in general. But in addition to these default themes, you can also create your own. And those themes can be based on your corporate colors. Once you have the ability to create themes, only certain users can do that. And those themes are applied and pushed out for everybody to view, you will be able to see them listed under theme, and then you can apply them to the report. So as you notice, as I select the different themes, it's modifying all of my objects to fit that. The nice thing about this is if I use the default or automatic colors, it will automatically change them to use whatever's specified in the theme. So that's another kind of reason why you would want to use the defaults over assigning your own. But yeah, you can create your own theme and apply it in that fashion.
Gotcha.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure.
Let's see. Let's try to squeeze in one more question here. I want to create a landing page for my report. Are there any templates or shapes to design it manually?
Yeah, so the one that I showed in, and I'm sorry, I'm going to share my screen again. The one I showed in the presentation, my table of contents, this was a template that I created specifically for my landing pages for all of my reports. And all that I used in this page were images and text objects. So this is an image of the corporate logo. This is a text object that describes the report. This is a text object that describes the pages. And then here's another image object that just displays a nice looking image for my report. So you can build things like that. It might be a good idea, depending on your audience, to use something like a video that maybe shows how to navigate the report or has someone on screen describing the report and the purpose of it. I always think it's nice to have that personal touch and seeing someone. So any of those things, any object that you can use in a regular page, you can use to build your table of contents page. And then all I did to create the template was on the page tab, I just saved the page as my page template. And now I can use it in other reports so they all look about the same.
Sure. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for questions today. On behalf of myself, Nicole, and all of SAS, we really hope that you enjoyed today's webinar. Thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.